So in case you guys have to go or miss anything out, we'll be uploading a video of this workshop to the ACM YouTube page shortly after the conclusion of this workshop. So let's get started. Just to quickly introduce ourselves, there's 5 of us AI officers here, here to help you guys and answer any questions you might have. So just to introduce myself, I'm John, currently the president of ACM AI, and I'm a second-year computer science major.
What's up, guys? I'm Hirsch. I'm a second-year computer science major, and I'm projects director this year at ACM.
I'm Vaishnavi. I'm a second-year CSE major, and I'm workshop director at ACM this year.
Hey guys, I'm Nisha. I'm an outreach and events officer for ACM AI.
I am Justin. I'm a second year. I help out with workshops.
Awesome. So why are we conducting a Building a Career in AI series? Well, UCLA has a ton of resources for people who want to get into AI, and we want to make these accessible as possible. But a thing that's really lacking is a lot of specific advice for UCLA undergrads about how they can get into AI at UCLA, what kind of opportunities and resources are available. And so we wanted to have a consolidated way to present this information to you guys. So hopefully you can build your own career in AI here at UCLA. Just a quick roadmap for this series. 2 weeks ago, we had our first workshop on course planning and about how you can build foundational knowledge of AI needed for various jobs and internships in machine learning. And you can find the recording of that workshop linked at the slides there. It's on the ACM YouTube page, and a link to the slides for that workshop is in the description of the video. This time, we'll be going over research positions and internship search, specifically for UCLA students. And later on, we'll be having guest speakers who are previous or current UCLA students who have broken into AI through research or industry work outside of UCLA. So who is this workshop series for? Our intention is to make this workshop series as accessible as possible for all majors and all years of people at UCLA. As long as you're interested in pursuing a career in AI, we hope to have something for you. And no prior experience in artificial intelligence is required. And this goes for whether or not you want to pursue industry or academia after graduating, or are undecided about what you want to do in the future. So hopefully you'll stick along with us for this. So a quick overview of what we're going to go over today. First, we're going to talk about research in artificial intelligence at UCLA and how you can get involved. Then we'll quickly go over what kind of positions and internships are available in artificial intelligence and machine learning in industry at big and small companies, and how you might want to tailor your resume and do certain things in order to improve your chances of getting these opportunities. We'll then go over a few quick resources that we can point you to and that we've compiled ourselves to hopefully guide your search. And lastly, we'll end off with a Q&A session where you can answer any individual questions you might have, either in chat or on voice, on video, whatever is comfortable for you, and we'd be happy to answer your questions individually. So first off, how do you get into AI and ML labs at UCLA? First, I think it's important to answer the question, what is research? Because it's not super clear for someone who maybe hasn't done research before. Researchers are generally trying to solve problems that haven't been solved before and trying to do them in novel ways. And a lot of the times, these novel ways are aiming to be faster than previous methods or trying to do things that haven't even ever been done before by previous algorithms. The bulk of this work is done by PhD and master's students, so graduate level students who are advised by professors who lead labs with these students in them. And a lot of the time, the goal for researchers is to make novel research contributions that are worthy to be published at top journals and conferences related to AI. So if you've ever seen any of these acronyms like AAAI, NeurIPS, JMLR, or ICML, these are all top machine learning and AI conferences, and most AI labs are trying to publish in these venues. And so if this kind of work is interesting to you, it's highly beneficial for you to try to get involved with the amazing AI and machine learning research that's here at UCLA. So why should you even do research at all? So there's a couple reasons why you might want to do this. The most obvious one is you want to pursue a PhD. The whole purpose of a PhD is to do a research project over a course of several years. And so getting research experience here at UCLA as an undergrad is a great way to improve your application prospects if you do want to pursue that graduate level degree in the future. For the most part, the most important part of your application when applying to PhD programs at any top computer science school would be to have previous experience in research, which is something that you can get relatively easily since you're currently at a research university like UCLA. If you don't necessarily want to go into academia, but want to do research in an industry lab, such as at Google AI or Facebook AI Research, getting research experience while you're an undergrad is one of the best ways in order to improve your chances of getting the ability to work in these industry research labs. Another reason you might want to work on research instead of maybe doing pure software engineering or another typical more conventional field or job in computer science is that you get more freedom to work on what you want. And you get to work on things that might take a long time to actually come to fruition, and that might not be immediately useful in a product. And so there's a lot of interesting questions out there that might not actually generate a profit for a company. And so the only real way you're going to make meaningful progress towards these questions is to kind of have an environment that allows you to take these risks and not worry too much about making a product or a profit. Another reason to do research in AI and machine learning specifically is if you just want to gain a lot of engineering skills and experience with engineering. In contrast to a lot of other research in computer science and AI almost always requires a lot of engineering. Generally, coming up with an algorithm alone is not super interesting, and generally you want to run experiments and run your algorithms on problems and see if your algorithms might actually be useful for some application later down the road. And lastly, one big reason to do research is you're currently at UCLA, a research university, and after your 4 years here, you might not ever get the opportunity to do that again unless you go to grad school. And so I would highly encourage you, if you have the time and the interest, to look to joining a research lab at UCLA while you're here. One quick thing to go over is what are the kinds of different research that are out there in various labs. And so there's a pretty big delineation between empirical and theoretical research. Typically, theoretical research is more focused on designing algorithms and proving optimality and complexity bounds for these algorithms, whereas empirical research is more focused on doing things to see if algorithms can be applied to various problems and are typically less concerned about rigorously proving why something works. A lot of the times you'll find in machine learning research, a lot of techniques that are used in deep learning, for example, haven't been proven to actually improve performance theoretically, but they're inspired by a lot of intuitions about things from other fields, and they work empirically, meaning that when people run experiments, they've found that these algorithms tend to work well, even though we don't really know why. And so these are the two real main lines of research, and it's something to think about when you're thinking about what kind of lab you would want to join, because typically labs fall within one of these two categories, whether or not you're doing research in AI or machine learning at all. So a quick thing to go over before you join a lab is what exactly is the structure of a typical research lab. Every research lab at a top university like UCLA has a principal investigator. This is the person who leads the lab and sets the lab direction. If you think of the lab as analogous to a company, you can think of the principal investigator as analogous to the CEO of a company. Additionally, a lab may or may not have additional affiliate professors, so other professors who are leading projects in that lab. And you can think of these people as analogous to an executive board of a company. And lastly, the last core component of a lab are the grad students. And these are the people who are actually doing the bulk of the research work. So you can kind of think of these people as, you know, the rest of the employees of the company. So how do you find the right lab for you? So contrary to what UCLA's faculty or the administration might tell you, the undergraduate research portal is actually pretty bad. It's not updated very well. And so you're honestly better off just Google searching a topic that you're interested in, say maybe computer vision or natural language processing, and then adding UCLA lab next to it. And typically, you'll very easily find a link to a website for this lab, because pretty much every single lab has a website that lists the people and the publications and research directions that the lab is going over. And so generally from this website, you can find who's the leader of the lab, the principal investigator, and usually this is the person to contact about anything in the lab. Another thing for undergraduates who are interested in joining the lab to look out for is that oftentimes labs will list undergraduates who are currently working in this lab, and if you're trying to decide what labs to maybe contact or join, a really good indicator that a lab treats its undergrads well or is even open to taking on undergrads for their projects is whether or not they already currently have undergrads in the lab. And so this can kind of give you an idea, or I guess a filter, in order to decide what kind of labs might be interesting to you. So how do you even contact a lab? First thing you want to do is you want to look thoroughly through the website of the lab and the website of the principal investigator. Sometimes the website of the principal investigator of the lab will be the same as the lab website, and sometimes these will be two separate websites. So definitely make sure to look out for that. When looking through both of these websites, something to look out for is that many labs will have specific instructions for contacting prospective undergraduates. So for instance, a professor might say, if you're interested in working in my lab, email me, or email this other professor, or email this grad student if you're interested in this project. And generally, you don't want to just jump the gun and just email the professor directly, because they might get annoyed, especially if they have clearly written that they want you to contact specific people. But in the case that no information is specified with regards to how to contact them, it's usually fine then to email the principal investigator if no instructions are given. And whenever you're contacting a lab, it's pretty sufficient just to send a short email indicating that you're interested in the research directions of the lab, and just attach your resume or your CV in order to just basically apply to the lab. It's a very informal process for most labs at UCLA and at most schools actually. And so this is really the way that you get these kind of opportunities. There's generally no formal application process. When you're sending in your resume, generally you should include the relevant experience you have, so previous engineering work, and coursework that's related to the research topic of the lab you're trying to get into. As I mentioned earlier, the application process is quite informal when compared to most jobs, and it's highly variable between labs. One thing that's common between almost every application process for a lab is that there's almost always at least one interview, and it's typically conducted by a graduate student that you would be potentially working with on a project directly. The nature of this interview can be technical or non-technical, and as I mentioned earlier, it's highly variable between labs. A lot of the time, you will actually also be asked to complete a small, simple task in order to prove your technical ability and your commitment to these projects. And so this is kind of what you can expect once you make contact with the lab and they decide to move forward with your application. So how do you improve your chances in getting into these labs? One good way to do this is to take courses taught by the principal investigator of the lab, especially if these are graduate level courses. So for instance, if I was interested in joining the natural language processing group that's led by Professor Kai-Wei Chang, it would be highly beneficial to take his machine learning course, CS 146, when he teaches it, and maybe even his graduate level natural language processing course, CS263 in order to get to know the professor better and kind of show that you are committed to actually learning about the topics that the professor is researching. Another thing you can do to improve your chances of getting into research labs is to briefly go over papers listed under publications on the website of the principal investigator or the lab itself. And you don't have to necessarily understand everything that's going on in a paper. After all, you're just undergraduate students. They won't expect you to understand everything that these graduate level students and professors are doing. But it's good to know at least what problem the lab is trying to work on trying to solve. And if you happen to be able to understand how they're trying to solve it, what solutions they're trying, even better. And having this knowledge it looks really good and is really important to have when you're doing any kind of interview with these labs. And lastly, as I mentioned earlier, it's always a good sign when there's other undergraduates who are already in the lab. And if you notice that these undergraduates are listed on the lab, you should try to contact these other undergraduates if you want to get a better sense of what it's like to actually work in this lab and what you might expect in terms of the interview and application process. And so these are just 3 quick tips if you're wanting to improve your chances of getting into any lab. So now we'll quickly go over some labs at UCLA related to various really popular subdomains for artificial intelligence and machine learning at UCLA. If you're interested in just general machine learning research, the UCLA Computational Machine Learning Lab is a good place to take a look at. The professor who leads this lab recently joined UCLA just a year ago, and you can find the website for the lab here. And if you're interested in taking a course with that professor, he teaches CS260 sometimes, which is the graduate level machine learning course. If you're interested in computer vision, there's a lot of different labs at UCLA that do computer vision. We just have 3 of them listed here. One is the Center for Vision and Cognition, Learning and Autonomy, and this is led by Professor Songchen Zhu. And they work on pretty much anything related to AI, but they specialize in vision and robotics. I'm currently in this lab, so if after this workshop is over, you have any questions for me, feel free to ask me about what I work on or what the application process might look like. Additionally, there's another vision lab led by Professor Stefano Sawato, and it's also a lab I'm currently in right now, so if you also have questions on that, you can talk to me after the workshop is over. And they're more focused on deep learning approaches to vision rather than statistical modeling. And lastly, another big vision lab at UCLA is the Visual Machines Group. This is a relatively new lab that was just created by a professor that just joined UCLA a couple of years ago, and they're known for taking undergraduates. So if you're interested, definitely look out for them. If you're interested in natural language processing, there's really only one lab that's working on natural language processing right now at UCLA, and that's the NLP lab led by Professor Kai-Wei Chang. If you're interested, I would highly recommend you take his natural language processing graduate level courses. It's a good way to kind of gauge whether or not you're really interested in the topic, and typically these courses are quite small and are a really good way to get to know the professor better. And if you want to know actually a lot more about these graduate level courses that we're mentioning, definitely check out the workshop that we had 2 weeks ago on the ACM YouTube page. If you're interested in applying machine learning for biology, there's quite a few options here. One is the Machine Learning and Genomics Lab. And so this lab works a lot on using machine learning in various bioinformatics applications. And the professor teaches CS146. So if you take that course, you'll improve your chances for getting into the lab and you're able to meet the professor more. The Oskin Research Group is also another lab that works on machine learning for biology problems. And this is a lab known for taking a lot of undergraduates. So if you're interested in joining a lab and maybe it's just your first time maybe joining a lab, this might be a good place to start if you're interested in doing ML for bio. And another lab to look out for is the AI and Imaging and Neuroscience lab, led by Professor Fabian Scalzo. And basically, they're working on using computer vision to analyze images of the brain, and they're doing really interesting stuff about that. If you're interested in data mining, the Scalable Analytics Institute, led by Professor Wei Wong, does a lot of interesting work with data mining and with machine learning on graph structured data and a lot of other tree structured data as well. Additionally, there's also the Sun Research Group, led by Professor Yuzo Sun, that does a lot of interesting stuff, actually with the Scalable Analytics Institute. And so if you're interested in these courses, or sorry, these labs, it would be highly beneficial to take CS 145, which is the data mining course at UCLA. If you're interested in theoretical machine learning, the Statistical Machine Learning Lab, led by Professor Chen Gu, is a new lab that joined UCLA just a year ago. And they're focused on proving a lot of complexity bounds for algorithms and coming up with new theoretical algorithms for machine learning, deep learning, and reinforcement learning. So if you're really interested in statistical and like the math behind machine learning, I would highly recommend you take a look at his lab. If you're interested in probabilistic artificial intelligence, the Automated Reasoning Group, led by Professor Adnan Darwich, does a lot of interesting work with things like Bayesian networks and other probabilistic graphs. And similarly, the Statistical and Relational AI lab, led by Professor Guy Vandenbroek, also works on really similar things, and they're more focused on probabilistic circuits. And you can take CS 161 if you're interested in joining those labs. Both professors teach that course throughout the year. And so those were just a small subset of the AI and machine learning labs here at UCLA. There's definitely a lot more. And over the past few years, UCLA has been hiring a lot of machine learning professors, so definitely be on the lookout for that if any professor with an interesting research direction comes up. And towards the end, we have a resources section that we mentioned earlier, and we'll have a link to a list that we have compiled a bunch of different AI and ML machine learning labs at UCLA that you can take a look at. And now we'll take a look at finding AI and ML research opportunities, or sorry, internship opportunities in industries, so at companies. And Nisha, I think you've gone over this.
Yeah, okay, so there are a lot of different AI and ML positions in industry, and we're gonna go over some of the most common ones today. So starting with data scientist, the role of a data scientist will vary a lot between different companies, so there's no set definition of what an intern in data science will do. These roles can be open to undergrads or to grad students, and again, there are a lot of different things you could be working on, and a lot of those things don't necessarily involve machine learning. So if you're really set on the idea of working in machine learning, you should definitely do your research and make sure that the data science role you're applying for is in the machine learning space. The other tricky thing with data science is there's a lot of different terminology. So you could be doing analytics or algorithms or modeling. And so again, this just comes down to research and making sure you know exactly what the role you're applying for involves. The next role is a software engineer on a machine learning or data science team. So if you're working as a software engineer, you're probably going to be more focused on building infrastructure for supporting ML engineers and ML researchers. So this could involve data processing workflows or developing tools for training or running experiments, or even deploying ML models in production. And so with software engineering, you're probably going to spend very little to no time at all working directly on ML engineering. So you're not going to be the one who's actually building the models, but you're going to be helping the people who are. And that brings us to the next role, which is ML engineer. And so these are the people who are building the models, who are applying known machine learning techniques. And their models are intended to be used in actual products. So this is a very advanced position that does require deep learning knowledge. And in the past, it was pretty dominated by graduate students. But now a lot of companies are opening up to allow undergraduate students to take on this responsibility. That said, bigger companies still do prefer grad students, and we'll get into some of the differences between bigger companies and like smaller startups a little later. So the next role is research engineer, and this is a type of software engineer who works on a research team, specifically an AI research team. And this role can be done with like a lower level degree. You don't need a PhD. And you'll basically be writing software to support ML research scientists. And so again, this could involve data processing workflow or running experiments or building frameworks that help accelerate research. And some examples of frameworks that you've probably heard of are like TensorFlow or PyTorch or OpenAI Gym. And then the last role that we're going to talk about today is a research scientist or applied scientist. And so if you take on this role, you'll be conducting research on creating new machine learning algorithms or applying previous research to new problems. And so a lot of people like this role a lot because you can work on projects that are more long-term, and you often have a lot of independence when it comes to picking your projects. So you can choose your projects very freely. But this is another example of an advanced role. So you would probably have a PhD or at the very least strong research publication to kind of show that you have the experience to take on this role. And then for many top labs, scientists will still be allowed to publish research publicly. So if you're working for a big N lab, you will still be able to publish for smaller companies.
So how do you actually get into AI at big companies? So unfortunately, most big AI or most big companies that have AI teams typically require you to have graduate degrees and with research experience in order to join their AI teams. In rare circumstances, undergraduates can try to apply to software engineering internships and hope to be placed on an AI team, but this is something that's really rare and something you can't really do directly. All you can really do is like build up your AI experience as much as possible through projects and coursework and hope that there's a position available and they're willing to put an undergraduate on it. And these big AI companies typically don't have AI positions specifically for undergraduates. So if you have a goal in the future and you're really dead set on doing AI work at a large company like Google or Facebook, it would be highly beneficial for you to pursue a graduate degree because you're simply not going to be able to compete with a lot of these other students for the most part. The story actually changes quite a lot for smaller companies and startups. And by smaller companies, I can even be talking about companies such as Lyft and Uber, which are pretty big billion-dollar companies. So any company that's not really a big N company. So at a lot of these companies, the trend over time recently has been that machine learning internship roles for undergrads have been a lot more common. So if you do a LinkedIn search or Google job search for machine learning intern roles, you'll find a lot of positions that are open to undergraduates. And oftentimes you'll still have to compete with graduate students. If you look at the requirements, sometimes they'll say pursuing a BS, MS, or PhD in machine learning or artificial intelligence or a related field. And a good way you can kind of be more competitive for these roles is to have graduate level coursework in machine learning and AI. And so if you think about, what's really the big difference between an undergrad and a master's student intern, the only real difference is that the master's student has taken graduate level coursework in deep learning, for instance. So if you have graduate level coursework and you have that on your resume, it makes you a lot more competitive with master's students. Additionally, it's also very useful to have experience in ML and AI research labs. And for obvious reasons, this makes you very competitive or a lot more competitive with PhD students who are supposed to be the people who are really good at doing research. So if you have a strong publication record, or if you get into a lab at UCLA and do a lot of really good work, you're going to be a lot more competitive for applying to these roles where you're competing with graduate level students. And there are actually a few positions open. Sometimes you'll have to look pretty hard for them, that are machine learning opportunities and internships specifically just for undergrads. In that case, you won't have to worry as much with competing with graduate level students, but the competition is still generally pretty high because this is a pretty hot field, and it would still be useful for you to have graduate level coursework and experience in ML or AI research labs. At startup companies, it gets a bit, it's even common for a lot of internships to be like not super official. And so you can actually cold email a lot of startups that are working on AI and machine learning stuff. And a lot of the times, you never know, they'll have an opening that isn't officially listed. And if you have a good experience, either through research labs or other projects you've done, this can be a good way to get it, like ML and AI research or internship experience in industry. So some general tips about just applying to ML and AI positions in industry. If a position is open to undergrads and grad students, it's highly implied that grad students are preferred, even if they don't say they prefer you to have a graduate level degree. And basically taking grad courses and doing research is the way to make yourself a lot more competitive for these positions. Another thing you can do is look at machine learning competitions that these companies host. So Google has been notorious for launching a bunch of different competitions on Kaggle. These are AI and machine learning competitions that have pretty large prize pools. So if you're able to do well on a lot of these challenges, it makes you stand out a lot more. And a lot of the times for these competitions, if you win, you're often offered an interview, or if you just do really well, you're often offered an interview, or if you have a really novel way of solving the problem that the competition is trying to solve, then that really improves your chances for that company as well. And many companies use these kind of machine learning and data science competitions as a way to recruit talent and find top performers. And lastly, if you're really dead set on working on a machine learning research team in industry, it's highly beneficial, and I would highly suggest that you plan on going for grad school, at least for a master's, in order to be really competitive if you want to work on a machine learning research team at a big company. It's just that the nature of the field right now is that there's way more people than there are opportunities, and so companies can be really selective and say we only take master's or PhD students. So if you really want to do this, then it would be highly beneficial for you to pursue this. So some resources for finding opportunities. Google actually has a really good job search tool. If you just search for like machine learning intern, you can go into their Google Jobs search interface. You can even turn on notifications for various opportunities or companies that you're interested in, and it's a really good way to find opportunities. Another is LinkedIn Job Search, and operates in a pretty similar way as Google's Job Search. If you really want to try to get into a startup, Y Combinator has a platform called Work for a Startup, and this is a centralized application that you can put on or you can apply to in order to apply to a variety of different Y Combinator startups. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, Y Combinator is a startup accelerator. So what they do is they take in a bunch of people apply, and they take in a bunch of startups and they fund them with around $100,000, and they fund a ton of companies and they mentor them for a few months and try to help them succeed as much as possible. Many Y Combinator startups have been valued at over billions of dollars. So some past examples include Airbnb, Lyft, Reddit. So a lot of top companies have come out of Y Combinator, and a lot of these Y Combinator companies are doing stuff with AI and machine learning. So applying to these startups is a good way to get your foot in the door without potentially having to compete with as many graduate students who are typically going for these bigger companies' research teams. And lastly, we have compiled a list of labs that are doing AI and machine learning work here at UCLA. So just to go over it real quickly, this is just a spreadsheet with a link to the website of the group's name, a description of what the group does, people who are in the group, and how you'd want to contact them if you wanted to join. So if you're interested in joining a lab at UCLA and the things that we presented on the slides previously weren't super interesting to you and you want to do something else, then this might be a good resource for you. Oops. Now I'll pass it over to Harsh, and he'll be talking about notable AI companies that you might want to take a look at.
Cool. So we've talked a lot about, or John's talked a lot about already, that there are a lot of different opportunities available for people that are interested in getting into ML. So I wanted to go ahead and point out a few companies that I thought would be interesting to look into. So there's really two types of companies on here. We have computer vision companies and we have NLP companies. So starting out with the computer vision, self-driving cars companies, we have DeepMap, Waymo, Argo AI, as well as Cruise. So starting off with Waymo, Waymo is a subsidiary of Alphabet. So they're essentially Google. So they're really, really tough to get into, but they're also doing a lot of really, really interesting work when it comes to self-driving cars. So Cruise is very similar to Waymo in that they are also doing self-driving car work. Cruise has a autonomous vehicle already built that I believe they're testing to see if it can be road ready. Now pivoting over to DeepMap and Argo AI. So what these two companies specialize in is the actual mapping of the computer vision. So for example, if your car is driving on the road, it needs to be able to map out exactly what is in front of it, whether that's a stop sign or a pedestrian or another car. And DeepMap and Argo AI specialize in that type of mapping technology. So on the other end, we have NLP companies. So I've listed out a couple here as well. So you have Cortical IO, Semantic Machines, SoundHound, and Ross. So starting out with Semantic Machines, they were recently acquired by Microsoft. But what Semantic Machines does is they create AI platforms that allow you to interact with other types of technology. So one example of this would be Microsoft's Cortana. Microsoft's Cortana allows you to interact with the computer simply using your voice. Cortical IO does something a little bit different. What they do is they use NLP in order to process like large, vast amounts of texts. For example, if you're a very large company and you put out some sort of feedback form, you'll get thousands, if not tens of thousands of responses to your feedback form. Obviously, it's going to be very, very tough for a team of people to go through all of these 10,000 responses. So what Cortical IO does is they've created NLP technology, which automatically goes through large texts or large amounts of texts, for example, these feedback forms that I just mentioned, and then will come up with analytics and insights based on that text. So Ross is another NLP company. I think what Ross really shows is the intersection of machine learning with other types of fields. So what Ross does is it provides a resource for lawyers in order to search vast amounts of texts that might match a case they're working on right now. For example, if I'm a lawyer working on case X about topic Y, I could search Ross's database, and Ross's NLP technology would help me find all relevant materials that could help me with case Y. Finally, SoundHound. So SoundHound initially started off as a competitor to Shazam, but they've branched out a little bit, and now they do different types of audio recognition, a lot of speech to text translation, and different things like that. So what I really wanted you guys to take away from this slide is that there's a ton of different companies and a ton of different fields that are using technologies like computer vision and NLP. And there's a lot of different opportunities out there. And I guess the best way to chase these opportunities is just to put yourself out there as much as you can.
Yeah, just to quickly mention, a lot of these companies actually have internship opportunities that are open to undergraduates and sometimes even undergraduates specifically. So when fall recruiting season comes around, hopefully if the economy is better, you can definitely look out for these internships. And it's something to look into because these are a lot easier to get into than maybe a larger company if you want to work specifically on AI for an internship. And yeah, that's all we have for you guys today. If you guys have any questions for us about any individual questions you might have about joining a lab or getting into companies doing ML or AI stuff, feel free to just use the voice feature of Zoom or type your question in chat and we'll get to your question as soon as possible. And thank you all for coming. In case you don't have any questions, please fill out our feedback form if you don't have any other questions for us, but we'll be happy to answer any questions you have now.
I have a question.
Sure.
Where would you say an undergrad student should start if they don't really have like tangible experience, I guess?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like a lot of the things that you guys mentioned, especially with the labs, I feel like a lot of it was like take this course or like just have this knowledge or have this experience already. And I'm sure it's like similar for internships. So I was kind of wondering like, where would you suggest starting, even if it's like personal, on the personal level, like looking for things, doing online research?
Yeah, I think the fact that we're all here at UCLA and have access to a lot of these really interesting courses is that the people who are teaching these courses are also people who have done research like on these topics. So I think definitely taking like the coursework, like the introduction to machine learning courses, the core fundamental machine learning research, or sorry, machine learning courses is really important. I think that's probably the best way to get started and get your own foundational knowledge on these topics. And once you have this foundational knowledge from this coursework, then you can start applying to these opportunities in labs or in companies. And also just a quick plug for ACM AI, we're probably going to be starting back our beginner and advanced track machine learning workshop series in the fall. We're currently working on revamping the content. So that's also another great way in order to get started with learning about the basics of machine learning and how you can then apply that to something you might work on later on. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, cool. So I guess, would you say that taking those courses would be enough to put on your resume to get those first internships? I think that's like my concern is like, do I need to show that I've already had experience to get experience?
Yeah.
Or like beyond coursework, I mean.
Sure. I'd say since if you're a UCLA student applying to a UCLA lab, most labs are perfectly fine with you just having experience from coursework alone and not having any additional experience. That's generally the case for most labs because they understand the nature of the courses at UCLA. They understand what they can kind of expect you to know if you've taken the courses that you say you've taken on your resume. For positions in industry, typically they do want to see you have a little bit more experience than most labs would. But I would still encourage you to apply if you do have the knowledge from coursework because you never know what might happen, especially a lot of these smaller companies where there's a much smaller applicant pool and they're often looking for people who are just really quick learners or really eager or passionate about the mission of the company. So I would say don't be discouraged, but if you want a good place to start, I would say research lab is probably a better place if you're looking for like a first time experience, if that makes sense.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I think we had some questions in chat. When is the best time to look for internships? I think Harsh answered this, but I'll reiterate again in case you didn't see it in the chat. Typically, most companies look for internships, look for prospective interns in the fall. And this can last all the way into winter and even into spring, but the bulk of recruiting for most top technology companies is in the fall and early winter. For research positions and research internships at UCLA, most labs will take people year round, so you don't have to really worry about when you want to actually apply to these labs. Another question. For someone who isn't a CS major, I'm not sure I could take a lot of CS courses. So what could I do to look better for labs? That's a great question. So there's actually a lot of machine learning coursework actually outside of the computer science department. I believe Math 156 is the machine learning course in the math department and also provides a lot of similar background to CS 146 if you wanted to get started with machine learning. Additionally, there's a lot of great resources at UCLA, such as ACM AI. We'll be having our workshops in the fall, hopefully, very shortly, as well as a lot of resources online. You may have heard of Andrew Ng's machine learning course and his deep learning specialization. Those are two resources that are highly well regarded within the machine learning community and are a good way to learn foundational knowledge for machine learning and deep learning, and should set you up at least enough to apply to a lot of labs at UCLA if you're interested in doing machine learning work. Could I get the link to the slides feedback form? Yeah, so I could go back to the first slide. The tiny URL to the slides will give you the links for everything else. So it's tinyurl.com/building a career in AI too. Will the link to slides recordings be posted somewhere? Yes, the recordings will be posted on the ACM YouTube page, and we'll link the slides on the ACM YouTube page as well. Sorry, I'm not sure if you answered this, but do research labs go on during the year mostly? Yeah, so if you're looking for a research lab, typically they do work throughout the entire year, including the summer. So they don't really shut down in the same way that undergrads might. Do you know if a lot of companies restrict internships to only CS majors? Most companies say that they want someone with a degree in computer science or a related field. So if you're in math or math of computation or statistics or physics even a lot of times, or electrical engineering, most companies will regard that as the same as long as you can pass any technical interview as any other major might. They shouldn't treat you super differently. Is there a best, most advantageous time to apply to a research lab? Yes, there actually are some things you can look out for. One thing is that if the lab is new to UCLA, typically they'll be looking for people to come help them get started with research projects because they'll have new things getting started. So for instance, labs such as the Statistical Machine Learning lab that I mentioned earlier would probably be more eager to look for undergraduates, since it's a new lab at UCLA, it's only a year old, than a lab that's been here for a long time and maybe already has a lot of undergrads or a lot of people working on projects. Another thing to think about, this might be reading into things too much, but if you look at publications of a research lab, if they recently published a lot of papers on specific topics, that might be an indication that they're going to be moving on to new things or building off of that research, so that might be a good time to apply to research labs as well. But generally speaking, you should be fine applying to research labs during almost any time of year, because labs work year-round and they're always trying to advance the state of the art in whatever particular field they're in. Do you know if any minors here at UCLA help with machine learning? I'm a cognitive science major and I'm focusing heavily on comp sci classes within my major's work, but is there a minor that's useful for working in AI? So for working in AI, I would say having computer science coursework is obviously highly beneficial because you do a lot of work with software engineering in order to run your experiments and run your models and whatnot. So minoring in computer science is probably a good idea. And machine learning is heavily reliant on math and statistics knowledge. So actually in machine learning research and a lot of machine learning roles, you'll find that a lot of people were actually statistics or math majors in college and not computer science. And so those are fields that are also really useful in AI. Hopefully that answers your question. Another question. I know that for science labs, you help run experiments and analyze data. But what exactly do you do as an undergraduate researcher do in machine learning labs? That's a great question. And this varies a lot depending on the nature of the lab. Typically, at least in the labs that I've had experiences with and that people I've known have experiences with at UCLA, typically undergraduate researchers, at least at the machine learning labs here, are given a lot more responsibility than just running experiments and analyzing data. For instance, in my lab, I'm asked to read research papers and to think critically about the contributions of these research papers and how we can develop or maybe augment things that other research has done and come up with novel ways to solve problems. And so a lot of the times, research labs will ask you to do this kind of work, and sometimes they'll just ask you to do like data like analysis and running experiments and stuff like that. But in my experience at UCLA, most of the machine learning labs here give you a lot more responsibility than a lot of other labs I've heard about in other fields, at least at UCLA. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, if you guys have any other questions, just feel free to put it in chat or just use voice. We'll be happy to answer them. Oh, the minor question. Yeah, so basically I just said CS, math, and stats, because those are all the fields that are actually, yeah, sorry about that. There's no CS minor at UCLA. But if there was, it would be good to do. Yeah, so stats and math would probably be the best choices for minor then, because those are the two fields that are highly related to doing machine learning work. So if you were to do a minor, those would be the most helpful. Are lab positions usually paid? So this depends on the lab. So most labs will give you some form of compensation, either monetary payment through a stipend or maybe even a salary, or you can get course credit. So you can get 199 research credit for a lot of labs. And so you can get basically a free A, free 4 units every quarter that you're doing research, and sometimes you can get paid. It really depends on the lab. And I would say it's kind of half and half whether or not they'll offer you payments or units or something else in terms of compensation.